I never expected to find 3 excavators tearing up my creek that Thursday morning, or that Barbara from the HOA would be smugly supervising the destruction, but they had no idea who they were messing with, or that I literally controlled every drop of water flowing into their pristine neighborhood. What would you do if you discovered your power-hungry HOA was not only destroying protected wetlands illegally, but threatening the water security of hundreds of families just to build 15 extra parking spaces? I still remember the day everything changed. The spring sun warmed my weathered hands as I knelt beside the gentle creek that cut through the eastern edge of my property, checking the small fish habitats I'd built after returning from my 3rd deployment. After 22 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, working on water infrastructure in some of the harshest environments on Earth, I'd finally found peace in this small piece of land, with its natural spring and the soothing sound of flowing water. The modest cabin I'd built overlooked Paradise Creek, named by my grandfather, who had purchased these 5 acres in the 1940s after returning from World War II. The land had been in our family ever since, a sanctuary passed from one veteran to another. When the luxury development called Oak Ridge estates sprung up around my property 10 years ago, I'd refused multiple offers to sell. Some things are worth more than money. "Excuse me, what exactly is happening here?" I called out, walking toward the line of heavy machinery now parked along my creek. Barbara Winters stood with her tablet in hand, her crisp pantsuit a stark contrast to my mud-stained jeans and faded Veterans First t-shirt. Her artificially reddened hair remained perfectly styled, despite the spring breeze, and her expression shifted from satisfaction to annoyance when she spotted me approaching. "Good morning, Colonel Fletcher," she said with exaggerated politeness. "Oak Ridge Estates is implementing the board-approved watershed management and parking expansion project." I watched in disbelief as one of the excavators scooped up a section of creek bank, destroying the careful erosion control measures I'd installed last summer. The operator avoided eye contact as he dumped the soil into a waiting truck. "Barbara, this creek is on my property. You're trespassing and causing environmental damage." I fought to keep my voice level, decades of military discipline helping me maintain composure. She sighed dramatically and held up her tablet. "Actually, Colonel, according to county records, the riparian easement extends 15 feet from the waterline, making this a shared waterway subject to community management." She tapped the screen with her manicured nail. "The board voted unanimously to culvert this portion and create additional visitor parking. The work permits were approved last week." My heart raced as I watched another scoop of earth lifted from the creek bed, exposing the natural spring that fed the waterway. "This is a protected watershed with endangered spotted salamanders. You can't just bury it in pipes." Barbara's smile tightened. "Environmental concerns were addressed in our impact study. We're installing state-of-the-art drainage systems that will actually improve water quality." She gestured toward a stack of large concrete culvert sections, waiting to be installed. "Besides, the salamander population can be relocated. Progress requires adaptation, Colonel." 2 residents from Oak Ridge Estates slowed their morning jog to watch our confrontation. I recognized Tom and Linda Michaels, who had recently moved in. They looked uncomfortable, but said nothing as they picked up their pace again. "I've reviewed every easement document related to this property," I said firmly. "There's no provision for culverting the creek or building over it. The water rights are explicitly protected," Barbara waved dismissively. "Our legal team has thoroughly vetted this project, Colonel Fletcher. Your outdated understanding of property law is, frankly, irrelevant. The HOA has jurisdiction over all waterways impacting our community. You need to stop this immediately," I insisted, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the EPA and the County Water Authority." "Save yourself the embarrassment," Barbara replied, with false sympathy. "The county commissioner personally signed off on this project. We've already rerouted the upstream flow. She pointed to a temporary dam they'd constructed at the northern edge of my property. By this time tomorrow, your little creek will be properly channeled underground where it belongs, and construction on the new parking area will begin next week. As she turned back toward her luxury SUV, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and you'll be receiving a notice about your non-compliant landscaping. Those native plants you've planted attract too many insects. The board has determined they constitute a nuisance under Section 4.7 of the Covenant. I suggest removing them before fines begin accumulating." I stood there, watching the machines continue their destruction, the creek water already turning muddy from the disturbance. A lifetime of facing challenges in war zones hadn't prepared me for this kind of calculated environmental vandalism happening in my own backyard. But Barbara and her board had grossly underestimated who they were dealing with. That evening, as promised, I found an official notice taped to my front door. The HOA was demanding $100 daily fines until I removed my native plant garden and granted their contractors uninhibited access to the entire creek bed for the duration of their project. The letter was signed by Barbara Winters, HOA president, and Gregory Palmer Esquius, their attorney. I took the notice inside and added it to my growing folder labeled HOA Overreach. But this wasn't just about bureaucratic bullying anymore. They had crossed a line, both literally and figuratively. My phone rang as I was reviewing my property surveys. "Colonel Fletcher, it's Mary Thompson. I live in the Oak Ridge community on Blue Heron Drive." Her voice was hushed, almost fearful. "I saw what they're doing to your creek. It's not right. Barbara's been getting worse since her husband joined the County Planning Commission." "Thank you for calling, Mary," I said, surprised by the unexpected ally. "Do you know if any environmental impact studies were actually done?" "That's just it," Mary continued. "My daughter works for the County Environmental Office. She says no proper permits were filed for culverting an active spring. They only submitted paperwork for minor drainage improvements. Barbara's been pushing this parking project for months, ever since her son started that boat dealership. He needs the spaces for his customers. The pieces were starting to fit together. This wasn't about watershed management. It was about commercial gain disguised as community improvement." "Colonel," Mary's voice dropped even lower, "there's something else you should know. Our water bills have tripled in the last year. Barbara claims it's due to infrastructure upgrades, but won't provide any accounting. Something isn't right." I thanked Mary for the information and hung up, then stepped onto my back porch. In the fading light, I could see the creek water backing up behind their temporary dam, slowly drowning the wetland plants I'd carefully established. The excavators sat silent now, waiting for morning to continue their destruction. What Barbara didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Paradise Creek wasn't just any waterway. The spring that fed it was the primary source for the entire Oak Ridge water system. The developers had built their infrastructure around it, assuming the steady flow would continue forever. They had no idea that my grandfather had secured perpetual water rights during the original land sale, rights that had been reinforced when I'd helped design the county's water management system after retiring from the army. Sleep didn't come easily that night. By morning, I had a plan. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the habits of military life still governing my days, even 5 years into retirement. Through my kitchen window, I could see the first light illuminating the temporary dam they'd built. The backed-up water had created a small pond overnight, drowning the willow saplings I'd planted last fall. By 7:30 a.m., the excavator's engines roared back to life. I pulled on my boots and grabbed the leather portfolio my late wife had given me when I received my final promotion. Inside were documents few people had ever seen, papers that would change everything. I was halfway to the creek when I heard the unmistakable sound of more vehicles arriving. Rounding the bend in my driveway, I stopped cold. 5 trucks were parked alongside the excavators. On their doors was the logo for Palmer Development Group. Barbara stood beside a tall man in an expensive suit who I recognized from Community board meetings as Gregory Palmer, the HOA's attorney. Behind them were at least a dozen workers in construction gear. "Colonel Fletcher," Palmer called out with practiced cordiality. "I was hoping we'd catch you before you left for the day. We need to discuss access to your northern property line." I approached slowly, counting faces, assessing the situation as I'd been trained to do. Several neighbors had gathered at the edge of the Oak Ridge walking path that ran along the development's perimeter. Among them was Mary Thompson, phone in hand, recording discreetly. "Mr. Palmer?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I don't recall authorizing any access to my property." Barbara stepped forward. "We're not here to debate, Colonel. The easement gives us the authority we need." She handed me an official-looking document. "This is an emergency injunction from the county allowing us to proceed with critical water management infrastructure. Your cooperation is appreciated but not required." I glanced at the paper. It was signed by Commissioner James Winters, Barbara's husband. The conflict of interest was blatant, but they clearly believed their connections made them untouchable. Palmer gestured to the workers. "We'll be extending the culvert project another 100 yards upstream today. The engineering team has determined that's necessary to properly manage the watershed. And coincidentally, I remarked, that will encompass the natural spring that feeds this creek." Palmer's smile flickered slightly. "The watershed management plan addresses all water features in this area." One of the excavator operators, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I recognized him as Mike Donovan, who had served in Iraq about 10 years after my time there. "Before you continue," I said calmly, "there's something you should know about this property and the water rights associated with it." I opened my portfolio. Barbara laughed dismissively. "Save the history lesson, Colonel. Whatever outdated paperwork you're clutching won't override a county injunction." Just then, a black SUV with the Department of Environmental Protection logo pulled up. A woman in her 40s stepped out, followed by 2 men in official uniforms. "What's going on here?" Barbara demanded. "This is a private HOA matter." The woman held up her credentials. "Lisa Reeves, Department of Environmental Protection. We've received reports of unauthorized modifications to a protected watershed." She surveyed the scene, her expression hardening at the sight of the muddy creek and damaged banks. "All work needs to stop immediately until we verify proper permits." Palmer stepped forward smoothly. "We have all necessary approvals, Agent Reeves. This is a simple drainage improvement project." He reached for his briefcase. "Actually," I interjected, "you're looking at the deliberate destruction of a Category 1 waterway and critical habitat for the Jefferson salamander, a state-protected species." I held out my phone showing photos I'd taken yesterday of the small amphibians living along the creek banks. Lisa Reeves examined the images, then turned toward the creek. "Those temporary dams and excavation activities require special permits beyond standard drainage work. Can I see your endangered species mitigation plan and water diversion authorization?" Palmer's confidence wavered visibly. "Those are back at the office. I can have them sent over this afternoon. Work stops now," Reeves stated firmly. "Nothing moves until I see complete documentation." As the DEP agents began taking soil samples and photographs, I noticed a familiar car pulling up. Dr. Elaine Rosenthal, my late wife's best friend and the county's senior hydrologist, stepped out with several rolled maps under her arm. "Jack," she called, "I brought those watershed surveys you requested." Barbara's face flushed with anger. "This is a coordinated ambush. Commissioner Winters will hear about this immediately." "I'm counting on that," I replied calmly. Elaine spread the maps across the hood of my truck. The DEP agents gathered around as she pointed to the detailed survey. This is the Oak Ridge watershed layout. The spring on Colonel Fletcher's property is the primary source for the entire development's water system. The underground aquifer feeds both the creek and the community wells. Lisa Reeves studied the maps intently. Culverting a primary source spring violates state water protection statutes without extensive environmental review. She turned to Palmer. Which doesn't appear to have been done. This is ridiculous, Barbara snapped. Our development has its own water system, completely independent of this little creek. I pulled another document from my portfolio, this one bearing the official seal of the Army Corps of Engineers. This is the original water resource assessment I conducted for this county when the development was first proposed. I was still on active duty then, heading up water infrastructure projects. I pointed to a highlighted section. The Oak Ridge water system draws 82% of its supply from this aquifer, accessed through pumps located half a mile downstream. The growing crowd of neighbors murmured in surprise. Even Palmer looked genuinely shocked. That's classified development information, he stammered. No, Mr. Palmer, it's public record. Your clients just never bothered to research who designed their water system or who holds the water rights to the source. I handed Lisa Reeves another document, the water rights certificate my grandfather had secured in 1946 and that I had updated and reinforced after returning from my last deployment. This is a perpetual water rights deed, I explained to the onlookers. When the development was approved, the county recognized these historical rights. In exchange for allowing Oak Ridge to tap into this aquifer, the agreement explicitly prohibits any modification to the natural waterway without the rights holder's approval. Mike Donovan, the excavator operator, shut down his machine and climbed down. I'm not risking my license on illegal water diversion, he announced, removing his work gloves. My family lives in Oak Ridge. We need that water. Other workers began, following his lead, stepping away from their equipment. Barbara's composure finally cracked. Get back to work immediately. You're all under contract. Palmer grabbed her arm, whispering urgently. The color drained from her face as he continued. Speaking. Colonel Fletcher, Palmer called, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. I'm sure we can reach a reasonable accommodation. Like you accommodated the endangered species living in this creek, asked Mary Thompson, loudly from the crowd, or the way you accommodated our concerns when you tripled our water bills last year. Other residents joined in with their own complaints, their voices growing bolder by the minute. Lisa Reeves raised her hand for quiet. I'm issuing a stop work order effective immediately. No further activity can occur in this watershed until a complete environmental review is conducted. She turned to her colleagues. Put up the boundary tape. This is now an active investigation site. As the DEP agents began cordoning off the area, Barbara stormed over to me, her face contorted with rage. You think you've won? Gregory's firm represents half the businesses in this county. The commissioner is my husband. This little stunt will cost you everything. I met her gaze steadily. Barbara, look around. Your neighbors are watching. The State Environmental Agency is documenting everything. And most importantly, you're threatening a regulated water supply during a drought year. I lowered my voice. That's not just an environmental violation, it's a criminal offense. For the first time, I saw something new in her eyes, fear. As Barbara and Palmer retreated to their vehicles, Elaine approached me with another map in hand. Jack, there's something important you need to see. It's about the aquifer testing we did last month. What about it? I asked quietly. The water quality samples from the Oak Ridge system showed unusual chemical concentrations, consistent with improper disposal practices at the new development going in above the watershed. She glanced toward Barbara's departing SUV. A development that Palmer's company is building. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture far more disturbing than a simple parking lot expansion. By mid-afternoon, my normally quiet property had transformed into a hub of activity. DEPI technicians collected water samples from various points along the creek, while documenting the damage already done. Neighbors from Oak Ridge Estates gathered in small groups, sharing stories and comparing notes. What had begun as my personal battle was rapidly expanding into something much larger. Mary Thompson had organized an impromptu meeting of residents on my front lawn. Nearly 30 people sat in a rough circle on the grass, many meeting each other for the first time, despite living in the same community for years. They fined us $800 last summer for installing a rain barrel system, said David Chen, an environmental engineer who lived on Maple Court. Barbara claimed it violated aesthetic guidelines, but I designed it to be nearly invisible from the street. We got hit with a $200 special assessment for water infrastructure improvements last quarter, added Sophia Rodriguez, a retired teacher. When I asked for details on the projects, Palmer sent a cease and desist letter claiming I was harassing the board. Each revelation built upon the last, creating a disturbing pattern of exploitation and intimidation. I listened from the porch, carefully documenting each story. 22 years in the military had taught me the value of thorough intelligence gathering before taking action. Elaine Rosenthal spread her water quality reports across my kitchen table, where Lisa Reeves and 2 other DEP officials reviewed them with growing concern. These contaminant levels shouldn't be present in a protected watershed, Lisa noted, pointing to several highlighted sections. These compounds are associated with industrial construction runoff, not residential usage. Elaine nodded grimly. The Palmer Heights development sits directly above the aquifer recharge zone. I flagged potential contamination risks during the initial review, but Commissioner Winters fast-tracked the approval anyway. Let me guess, I said. Overriding the environmental concerns in the name of economic development? Exactly, Elaine. Confirmed. The technical objections mysteriously disappeared from the final report. I filed formal protests, but they were buried. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike Donovan, the excavator operator who had walked off the job. Meeting happening at Palmer's office. Barbara furious. Talking about emergency weekend work while DEP distracted. Thought you should know. I showed the message to Lisa, who immediately began making calls to secure round-the-clock monitoring of the site. As she stepped outside, another visitor arrived. Carlos Vasquez, the county's water utility director and a fellow veteran I'd worked with on several infrastructure projects. "Jack, what the hell happened here?" he asked, surveying the damaged creek bed. "I just got 3 alarming calls about potential impacts to our water supply." I brought him up to speed quickly, showing him the HOA's culvert plans and Barbara's injunction. His expression darkened with each detail. "This isn't just about a parking lot," Carlos said, lowering his voice. "The County Water Authority detected unusual usage patterns from Oak Ridge over the past 6 months. Their consumption has increased by 40%, but population growth doesn't explain it." "Where's the water going?" I asked. Carlos pulled up a satellite map on his tablet. "We suspect it's being diverted here," he said, pointing to a recently cleared area just beyond the Oak Ridge property line, Palmer Heights construction site. Building a luxury development requires a lot of water, and commercial rates are triple what residential customers pay. The picture was becoming clearer. Barbara and Palmer weren't just building a parking lot, they were attempting to gain control of the entire water system by burying my creek, capturing the spring, and redirecting resources to their commercial ventures. As evening approached, Mary knocked on my door, accompanied by Leonard Okafor, a retired accountant who served on the Oak Ridge Finance Committee. "Colonel Fletcher, I've brought something you need to see," Leonard said, placing a thick binder on the kitchen table. "I've been questioning certain HOA expenditures for months, but Barbara always blocks access to the complete records. Yesterday, The assistant treasurer finally got concerned enough to give me these. He opened the binder to reveal detailed financial statements for the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. Colored tabs marked various sections, with Leonard's neat handwriting noting discrepancies. Over the past 18 months, the HOA has collected $2.3 million in special assessments for water infrastructure improvements, he explained, pointing to a column of figures. But only $340,000 has been paid to actual utility contractors. The rest was funneled through a company called Winters Palm Holdings. Let me guess, I said. Owned by Barbara Winters and Gregory Palmer. Leonard nodded grimly. They've been systematically draining the HOA accounts while raising resident fees. But that's not the worst part. He flipped to another section. They've taken out a $5 million loan against future HOA collections to fund a water rights acquisition project. Mary gasped. They're using our money to try to steal our water. It appears so, Leonard confirmed. The loan documents reference acquiring strategic natural resources for the long-term benefit of Oak Ridge and affiliated developments. The implications were staggering. Barbara and Palmer weren't just building a parking lot over my creek. They were attempting to seize control of the entire regional water supply during a drought year, positioning themselves to profit enormously as water became increasingly scarce. Outside, more neighbors continued to arrive, sharing stories and comparing violation notices. Someone had started a spreadsheet tracking all HOA fines and special assessments, revealing that certain board members' properties never received citations, while others, particularly those who questioned Barbara, faced constant harassment. My military training kicked in as I organized the growing mountain of evidence. Each document, text message, and testimony was carefully catalogued and copied. If Barbara and Palmer wanted a war over resources, they had chosen the wrong opponent. I hadn't spent 2 decades securing water infrastructure in conflict zones to watch a corrupt HOA president destroy a watershed for profit. As night fell, I received an urgent call from Carlos. "Jack, you need to see this," he said, his voice tense. "The water monitoring station downstream from your property is showing unusual activity. The flow rate dropped dramatically in the past hour." I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the creek, where I found Lisa Reeves already inspecting the temporary dam. The water level had dropped significantly, exposing mudflats that had been submerged earlier. "Someone tampered with the flow controls," she confirmed, pointing to fresh footprints in the mud. "They're diverting water somewhere else." Following the creek upstream, we discovered a newly installed pipe hidden beneath fallen branches, siphoning water away from the natural channel toward the Palmer Heights construction site. The brazen violation of the stop work order suggested desperation or supreme confidence in their political protection. Lisa immediately documented the illegal diversion and called for emergency enforcement. "This crosses the line from environmental violation into criminal territory," she said, photographing the setup. "Tampering with a public water supply during drought conditions carries serious penalties." As we walked back toward my house, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Back off now, Colonel, or you'll regret it. Some veterans return to parades, others to unfortunate accidents. Your choice." The threat only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just about a creek or a parking lot anymore. The stakes had escalated dramatically, and lives were potentially at risk. Barbara and Palmer had underestimated not only my legal standing, but my resolve. They didn't realize I had faced far more dangerous opponents than corrupt developers during my military career. Back at the house, I found Mary coordinating an impromptu community meeting for the following morning. "We've confirmed that 17 Oak Ridge board members will attend," she reported. "Even some of Barbara's former allies are questioning what's happening." Leonard looked up from his laptop where he was compiling financial evidence. "I've been in touch with the State Attorney General's office. They're interested in our financial documentation." The battle lines were drawn. By midnight, we had organized the evidence, prepared statements from affected residents, and developed a comprehensive timeline of the HOA's increasingly aggressive actions. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation Barbara and Palmer never expected, one where money and political connections wouldn't save them. As I finally prepared for sleep, I stepped onto my back porch one last time. The nearly full moon illuminated the damaged creek bed, the displaced, wildlife, and the machines poised to continue their destruction. But it also revealed dozens of small lights moving throughout the Oak Ridge community. Neighbors talking to neighbors, awareness spreading, and community forming where division had reigned. Barbara had bulldozed my creek, but in doing so, she had unwittingly unleashed something far more powerful than water, truth and community solidarity. Dawn broke with the sound of vehicles approaching, not excavators this time, but news vans. Someone had tipped off the media, and 3 different stations had arrived to cover what they were calling the Battle of Paradise Creek. I hadn't sought publicity, but I welcomed the transparency it would bring. By 9 a.m., over 200 Oak Ridge residents had gathered on my property. They'd brought folding chairs, homemade signs, and determination. The creek had become a symbol of something larger, their community reclaiming its voice. As I prepared to address the crowd, a black SUV sped up my driveway, brakes screeching as it stopped. Barbara emerged, her usual polished appearance noticeably disheveled. "This is an illegal gathering," she shouted, marching toward me with Palmer hurrying behind her. "You're trespassing on HOA jurisdiction." The crowd parted silently as Barbara approached, phone cameras recording her every move. Commissioner Winters stepped out of the SUV next, his official county vehicle a blatant misuse of government resources. "Colonel Fletcher," he called, attempting to sound authoritative. "This situation has escalated unnecessarily. I'm here to mediate a reasonable solution." Before I could respond, a 4th vehicle arrived, this one bearing state police insignia. 2 officers approached, accompanied by a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. "Commissioner James Winters," she called out. "I'm Special Agent Diana Torres, State Financial Crimes Task Force. We have a warrant to seize documents related to Oak Ridge Estates HOA and Winters Palm Holdings." The blood drained from Winters' face as Torres handed him the paperwork. Barbara lunged for her husband's arm, whispering frantically. Palmer attempted damage control, stepping forward with practiced confidence. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. My clients have acted within their legal authority as what, Mr. Palmer?" Leonard called from the crowd, holding up financial records. "As thieves who embezzled $2 million from their neighbors. As criminals who tried to steal a protected water supply." The state officers moved toward Barbara and Winters, who now looked panicked rather than powerful. I raised my hand, quieting the murmurs from the crowd. "Barbara, you bulldozed my creek to build parking for your son's business. You threatened me when I stood in your way, but your biggest mistake wasn't destroying protected wetlands or even attempting to seize the water rights." I gestured toward the gathered residents. "It was forgetting that communities are built on trust, not fear." Carlos stepped forward with an official-looking document. "The County Water Authority has revoked all special permissions previously granted to the Oak Ridge. HOA, water management returns to professional oversight, effective immediately." Lisa Reeves added, "The Department of Environmental Protection is filing criminal charges for water supply tampering, endangered species habitat destruction, and fraudulent permitting." As Barbara, Palmer, and Commissioner Winters were escorted to separate police vehicles, the crowd erupted in applause. Mary approached with a document bearing dozens of signatures. "We've voted to dissolve the current HOA board," she announced. "We're establishing a new community association with transparent governance and environmental stewardship as core principles." 6 months later, Paradise Creek flows freely again. The restoration project, led by volunteer residents with environmental expertise, has rebuilt the banks and replanted native species. The salamanders have returned, along with herons, kingfishers, and countless other creatures. Where Barbara had planned parking spaces, Oak Ridge residents created a community garden and educational wetland preserve. Children from local schools visit regularly to learn about watershed protection and sustainable water usage. The new community association, democratically elected and transparent in its operations, has reduced fees by 40% while improving services. The water bills have returned to reasonable levels, with a portion of fees supporting conservation efforts. Barbara, Palmer, and Commissioner Winters await trial on multiple felony charges. Their assets have been frozen, including the half-built Palmer Heights development, which has been redesigned as affordable housing with state-of-the-art water conservation systems. As for me, I find peace again by my creek, watching the sunset reflect off the clear, flowing water. Sometimes neighbors join me, bringing chairs and conversation. What began as a battle over a bulldozed creek transformed an entire community's understanding of what truly matters. Not property values or power, but the natural resources we all depend on and the trust we place in each other to protect them. The water flows freely now, nourishing not just the land, but the community that nearly lost it. And that, I believe, is the most powerful current of all.